Hey everyone, welcome to another video. This one is going to be all about the Sons of Horus. So specifically, we're going to be painting Malagurst, the amazing new model from Forge World. I'm super into this model. I think it's fantastic. And yeah, me and Sons of Horus actually go way back. So I couldn't find any photos because it was such a long time ago. It was really when I got back into the hobby. So like 2014, and actually Sons of Horus was kind of the army I was trying to do back then. So I actually had to Google and find some images of my old Sons of Horus, and it was quite fun going down memory lane looking at these. I'm actually super fond of this Loken, and it's a real special model for me because I think I got the Forge World Best of Show in 2014, and this was just crazy to me at the time. It was probably one of my favourite events. It's the first time me and Rich Marlowe sort of did a hobby trip away, and we were super into Heresy at the time, so it was kind of the most enjoyable weekend anyway, back when the Weekender was a thing, and it was such a cool event. And I was super surprised to get a best of show for this model. And I'd never won a competition before, I don't think. I think this was my first sort of win, and it was just insane to me. I was like, what, for real? This Loken? But yeah, so I look at this model with a lot of fond memories, and I guess that was the start of me getting really into competition painting. So it's definitely an important one. It's kind of crazy looking at my style back then. I've learnt a lot since, and yeah, I wouldn't paint it in this way again. But the main reason I wanted to bring it up is actually to talk about the green that I used specifically on it. I was using, I think, Cabalite green from Citadel, and I was highlighting with Cyberite green, also from Citadel, and adding in some like white or ivory or something like that. And these are quite nice sea greeny colours. Like, there's nothing wrong with this green, but it's very vibrant and saturated. And definitely I've kind of moved away from using colours like that all the time. And Sons of Horus, they're bad guys, right? They're baddies. So although I wasn't looking to do a grim dark style, I was definitely looking to do Malagurst with a more desaturated colour. I was looking at the Horus Heresy plates of the figures, the kind of the colour plates we get in the black books, and they're just always the best references. You know, Henry loves Lees for doing his Heresy series on YouTube, and they're a massive influence to me too. And the main thing I observed was how boring the shadows are in this image. If you look, it's kind of just mixed with black. Or it's grey mixed with black, so it's yeah, just a very desaturated shadow in comparison to what I had done previously with the kind of Cabalite green and stuff like that. I'd seen a lot of people use the official Forge World colours, so the Sons of Horus green and the Lupercal green, and I really liked how this looked. And the main observation is it's far more desaturated than the colours I'd used before, especially the Sons of Horus green. It's kind of grey, really. Actually, when I looked at Lupercal green, it was quite a saturated colour. So when I was sort of thinking, okay, what am I going to do for this recipe, I ditched the Lupercal green because I think it was too vibrant. And looking at the colour plate, I think black is actually fine to shade it with. Maybe a mixture of both would be good. And then I was going to use the Sons of Horus green as kind of the main mid-tone. I experimented on my palette with how to create highlights because I kind of wanted them to be desaturated and dark, and I wouldn't say I was going for a pure grimdark style, but I wanted this model to be evil because he is, you know, he's a real bad guy, this one. So I didn't want a nice happy green. So I played around with some colours, and I picked up Green Sky from Vallejo, and actually one of my other really old projects was this Contemptor Dreadnought. I couldn't find a high resolution photo. Hopefully I can sometime find a nice photo of this old model of mine. But this had highlights of Green Sky. I actually really like it. It's a little bit too bright overall because there's not enough shadow. But yeah, I like that tone of green you get from green sky, so I experimented with mixing that in with the Sons of Horus green. After some tests, I decided this is what I was going to go for. So I was going to use Sons of Horus green mixed with a little bit of black for shading, and then the mid-tone would be Sons of Horus green on its own, and then for highlighting I was going to add some green sky. The only thing about green sky is when I painted it on neat, so pure green sky, I think it was a little too vibrant, so I tried instead using some pastel green with the Sons of Horus, and this desaturated it too quickly. It was kind of turning too white and minty, so it's quite fussy, but in the end I mixed the first highlights with Sons of Horus and the green sky, and then before I get to pure green sky I actually added a little pastel green, but you could just use white or ivory or something like that. But basically you get to a point where you have a mix of Sons of Horus and green sky and you get a real sweet spot. And then if you want some brighter values, you need something to desaturate a little more. If this seems a little bit complicated, then what I would do is just get some green sky on the palette, add a little bit of Sons of Horus to that, and that'll be your sort of brightest highlight for most things, to be honest. Really, it was only a couple areas of Malagurst that I needed, a brighter colour, and actually you don't really need it much brighter. But when we go through the tutorial, I will show you those points that I do that. Okay, so not much prep work to do that's special. I built the model, basically. I had the banner separate because I'm intending to airbrush the metallics of the banner, so I get those perfect, and I think it might get in the way a bit. And then I did the head separately because I want to spray that in pure white or with a pre-highlight. So I just had it in those 3 parts. But what I'm doing here is I couldn't decide whether I want it on a gaming base or a display base. So I actually got some Milliput and I stuck a little bit of it on this plinth, and I'm just squidging in the base basically to make a mark. And then I can kind of make a base that's going to work for this figure, and I can decide which one I use later on, I'm actually tempted to maybe just run a magnet in it. I don't really like magnets, but I might do it on the display plinth, and then if I ever do an army of Sons of Horus, then I can take it off it. Honestly, I'd really love to do a Sons of Horus army because I actually failed doing that army back in the day. I had so many problems with trying to get transfers to work, and shoulder pads didn't fit, so I just gave up on the project. And I'm a lot better at painting now, so I'd love to actually do it. But anyway, I think it's not very realistic for me given my current army track record. So we're starting out with a pre-highlight now. So we're going to airbrush some white over black, and I've run out of Tamiya white, which is my preference. So I think I've got some Vallejo here. It just doesn't, stick as well or come out of the airbrush as well as Tamiya. So I definitely prefer it, but I'll get the job done for this one model. If you don't have an airbrush, then I think I would probably go for maybe spraying some grey cere over black or something like that. I actually think for this scheme that it's really important because the Sons of Horus paint is quite translucent, which isn't great for brushing on, and it doesn't really go over black. And the kind of specific tone I'm looking for, it just needs that help underneath with the white. So I do advise doing that. You could actually paint your highlights in white. So just paint the kind of big wide highlights in pure white and then brush over that. But I would advise using an airbrush if you can. So you can see my light source is coming from the left, and this is just so it looks good from when you're looking down the barrel of the gun, and the light will sort of hit from one side, but also if you look front on facing the icon, I think that will look good too. I'm doing some bounce lights like here on the shoulder, so they're not quite as bright, but we have like a little bit of a highlight on the bottom side. And on the reverse on the back, I will highlight the legs and stuff, but I'm not going to push the highlighting quite as much as I have on the front. So it's not as important, but I definitely want some white everywhere where the green is going to be, just to really help out that Sons of Horus green. Make sure you hit that cylinder across the top of the backpack. Such a nice shape to paint those those big cylinders. And then I'll just finish with a nice highlight on the left side of the left leg. I also pre-highlight the head with the same light source, and this is really important that you have a lot of white on the skin, in my opinion. Again, if you don't have an airbrush, then I would do a pale grey primer like Gracie. I think Gracie is fantastic. Because I knew the pre-highlight was so important for this green, I tried painting on some brushed on white highlights. So basically I just took some white paint, and where I'd done the airbrush highlights, I made them brighter by brushing on the paint. And the paint turns out brighter because I think the pigment is denser when you brush it on. Obviously when you're spraying it on, it's always going to be diluted, so it just doesn't get quite as bright. In retrospect, after painting the model, I don't really think this was necessary. I really didn't spend long on it, like a couple minutes adding some highlights. But yeah, I don't think I really needed it. I would have rather used Tamiya white and just got a really intense kind of white with the airbrush, and that would have done the job because I ended up doing a lot of brush highlights later and they did the work. So a nice easy job now, because we're just going to spray some Sons of Horus green on. I always try and really dilute my paint first of all, because I'm better off spraying too diluted than I am obviously too opaque. But I did find with this Sons of Horus, like I said, it's really translucent. So I diluted it kind of how I normally would, and it basically did nothing. So I had to thicken it up, and I had to do quite a few layers to kind of build up and not kill that pre-highlight, but make sure the shadows are nice and opaque with Sons of Horus Green too. So yeah, you need to learn how to use this paint. In fact, every paint you kind of try for the first time, they have their own little quirks, and this one, yeah, is very see-through. The tone is good though, so it's worth it. And yeah, just get a very, very smooth base coat of this Sons of Horus Green over, I don't know, 3 or 4 layers or something. I prioritized getting an opaque layer of Sons of Horus Green, and that meant that you can't really see the pre-highlight, so it's more important to get that sort of light green as bright as you can, as opposed to having the shading. And what I'm doing now is doing some post shading, whatever you want to call it. I'm putting the shadows back in now, and this time I've just added a little bit of black. I'm using AK black here, and yeah, I'm just shading it down basically where I had the black before. And this is where having Sons of Horus Green being translucent is actually useful, because we add some black to it, and black's obviously super opaque, but having the weak Sons of Horus Green means it's quite easy to control the shading. You can see I'm actually getting quite a soft shadow here. It's like quite a nice grey. But you can see what I mean when we looked at the reference that we're going for a desaturated shadow, because yeah, it's basically a grey. It's super boring, but that's what I want. And it's quite hard to stick to sometimes, because you think, oh, these colours are boring, but ultimately we're trying to make this model look a bit evil and get some atmosphere, and sometimes just shading with black works. So, you know, you get a lot of people say don't ever shade with black, but actually it's fine to shade with black, because it can make the other colours around it look really nice. You just need to be aware of how it behaves, and it will just kill any colour very, very quickly. So that was the kind of first pass where I added a little bit of black, and then I just add some more. And you can keep just adding black to the cup until you think you've got the contrast you want. So, you know, you can take your time with it. If I was doing this for an army, then I guess I would maybe make a mixing pot. But I think you learn sort of over time how much black to get the colour you want. You can see there on the collar, now it's looking pretty dark. And I'm trying to spray upwards for most of the time, just to get any of the parts that kind of face the shadow there. But like I said in the last clip, it's surprisingly easy to control this kind of translucent colour. Obviously thin it down quite a lot and just do little sprays and let it dry so you don't kind of flood any area. And yeah, I'm just working my way around the model, shading it up, and I have to do sort of several passes as it's so thin, but I sort of move around, let it dry and come back to it. It looks really nice on the shoulder there, starting to get a nice bit of contrast. This step's really worth taking your time with, I think. You need some good airbrush control, but it's nice practice. If you make a mistake, spray some white again and spray the Sons of Horus again, but I think you'll be fine. Looks really good on the calf there, getting that shadow in. Nice blending. So this clip is actually where I was messing around with working out the highlight colour, like I said when we looked at the palette earlier. And this is where I sort of worked out quite quickly. I needed that green sky for a bit of power. Also, I didn't notice at the time. I thought, oh, that's a bad cast. But I'm highlighting the belt there. So, yeah, that's not an armor panel. It's a belt. I don't know. I didn't notice the belt buckle because it was like the same width as the armor panel below it. I thought it was like segmented armor. So, yeah, you'll see later that gets coated in black. But good practice for the highlight color anyway. So the first highlight is going to be Sons of Horus Green with just a touch of the green sky in it. And this is so you can blend it in with your airbrush work basically. So follow the highlights you did with the airbrush and then just enhance them and make sure you paint specific shapes. So don't be a slave to what you've airbrushed and copy it exactly. On the collar here I just kind of paint some interesting volumes and kind of paint the light to the point I think it needs to be. So you can see I'm working on the leg here, building up the highlight on that knee. So I'm following the shape of the highlight, but I actually have to paint it a bit wider. It got a bit too narrow with the airbrushing, so I do have to adjust that. And I like this shot on the shin. You can see I'm kind of doing rough brush marks, and that's kind of reminiscent, I think, of those Forge World color plates. They're very textured. So I'm not doing this super perfect. I want to build this up with lots of mini brush strokes and scratches, and I am going to weather this, so yeah, I want a kind of textured look, but the paint is diluted so I get a nice finish. And all I do for the highlighting is just keep adding the green sky like I showed you when we mixed the palette, and you don't need to do the brightest highlights on every area. You can see near the end that I focused the highlights around the collar, the left leg, especially the thigh and the knee, whereas the shin is actually slightly darker because it kind of turns away from the light. So it's really only those extreme areas on the collar and the leg that I'm pushing really far. But yeah, we're just building up with the green sky added in and just follow those highlights you've airbrushed. So it should be quite simple at this stage. Just take your time to apply them really well. I got to a point where I was, I don't know, mostly through some highlights. I had quite a bit to do. I'd done a bit of the front and I thought I need to paint the black in because I can't really tell how good this looks. And yeah, there was a lot of black. So base coat the black and then we're going to skip to me having finished blocking in all the black. And you can see it's most of the model. I was kind of wondering why I sprayed it green, but yeah, it's definitely worth doing it this way. It took me quite a long time just to block the black in, but it looks fantastic. Now we have all the trim and the detail in black. So we're going to work on this big old tube on the backpack because I think it's a good one to demonstrate. You can see on this first highlight that I try and find a colour just a tiny bit lighter than what we've sprayed. Just trying to enhance and set that up for the following highlights. I'm also going to highlight all of these individual holes and yeah, this colour is actually a little dark for it, so I come back later and do a brighter one. So here we've added some more green sky and I'm just moving a little further in, the smallest amount I can really, just to build a nice broad highlight. And I'm always pushing the paint towards the kind of centre of where I want the brightest point to be. And that's to help get a blend quickly, you know, without doing much glazing or changing after. And you can see it looks quite nice and soft and natural already. And now I've got this brighter colour, I go back and I highlight all those individual vents. In the shadow, you don't want the highlight to be too bright, but what we'll do is once we've finished highlighting the main volume on the kind of vent holes in the main light, we'll push those a bit brighter. And you can see I'm just doing another layer here, building it up nice and strong. So you just need to take your time with these highlights to kind of integrate them in with your airbrush work. And again, we've got some more green sky. And this is what I was talking about, where your final highlight for most things is going to be green sky with still a little bit of the Sons of Horus green in it. So that's going to work for most areas. Only on the kind of parts you really want to draw attention to, you want to go further than that. But for this part, that's fine. And I didn't highlight this too bright because I didn't want to draw attention to this piece that was behind the head. So that's why the collar has brighter highlights, even though they're in a kind of similar situation. And you can finish off this section and all the sections by hitting up some edge highlights where it feels necessary. And I'll also put that nice bright highlight underneath all of those vents. And don't highlight the top part of the circle, just put a highlight on the bottom, and that'll kind of help sell your light source that is coming from above. If you do a highlight all the way around these circles, then, I don't know, it doesn't look that realistic. So we're on the left-hand side of the leg in the kind of the shadow side, and it's a little bit dull. So this one still wants some rendering, but it doesn't want to go as bright as kind of the main side. So here I've just got some Sons of Horus green, and it's been dulled so much by that kind of black glaze that you can see, yeah, it looks super dark compared to the highlights we've done. So yeah, I start just repainting these in with Sons of Horus green and just try and get a nice highlight width with that. And you can do this approach to all of the shadow side, so you're still going to highlight it, but it's not going to go as bright. The brightest highlight for the dark or shadow side or secondary highlight is going to be Sons of Horus green with a teeny bit of the green sky in. So hardly anything at all. It's like the first highlight on that kind of main side. Because I adjusted the volumes of my highlights, I kind of made them wider in this shadow side. I needed to blend it up a little bit. And so I made a glaze of Sons of Horus green mixed with some black, and I diluted this pretty heavily. And this was surprisingly easy to glaze with, and I think it's because, again, that Sons of Horus green is translucent. So the same way that it was easy to shade with the airbrush, I found it quite forgiving when we were doing glazing here. So just always remember to have very little on your brush and push the pigment into the shadow, away from those highlights. After this, I ended up doing some glazes on the light side, and because this was so much brighter, I had to first do a glaze with Sons of Horus green just to kind of soften up those highlights where I'd maybe pushed them too bright or they just needed to be blended in. And after I'd blended sort of the highlight part with Sons of Horus green, I also blended into the shadow. So you can kind of reverse the stages, so you glaze with a lighter colour, then glaze with a darker colour, always pushing the paint into the shadow. But it's kind of the reverse of the layering you did earlier, where you get a smaller and smaller area. I knew I wanted to do some chipping on this. I didn't want it to be a super clean green. Again, looking at the plates, there's a lot of texture. But I wanted this to be really fine. So here I'm actually practicing how to do the battle damage on the back of the leg, because it's not quite as important as the front. I didn't want to mess it up. And I'm just using Rhinox Hide, kind of the go-to chipping paint. And I'm using a 2-0 brush, so really fine. And here you can see I pluck up the courage to try some battle damage on the front. And you can see I'm trying to do very, very small chips. I think often we do battle damage a bit too chunky. So yeah, I'm trying to do these really fine, so you've got that kind of subtle texture. And maybe you can't see it when it's far away, you just see the highlights, but when you go in close, you see the texture of the brush strokes and you see this additional texture of the battle damage. I focus on any kind of corners like the toe here, that would be worn away with paint. And then I put a couple highlights on the knee pad and any important areas. If you don't like some of the chips you do, like I did a big one there, I think looks silly on the knee, you can always get your highlight color and erase it. It's not too difficult to cover these things up if you don't like it. So I'm big and brave here and do the chips on the main leg, kind of, the one that's going to look great in that photograph. And, the bottoms of the shins should have a lot of chipping, as would the toes. So yeah, it's a balance of kind of making it look heavily worn without it ruining your effect or looking over the top. So just start with a few and make sure they're random, sort of not spotty all over. And yeah, there's a little bit of an art to this, but I think the main thing is to try and do them as fine as possible, and then it looks subtle and a bit more in scale, you know. Here you can see I really wear away the edge on the torso, so almost where I've done that edge highlight, I kind of erase it and replace it with brown, but I think that works. And I'm just slowly making my way around the model, making sure that, you know, it's weathered all over, but the chips are in nice random places. Doesn't show up too well on the shadow, but I think that's absolutely fine. And here you can see on the leg, I really kind of add a lot of battle damage. And yeah, that's a corner, so I think that all the paint would kind of come off here. And another repeat, but I just really like the corners of these toes, both for demonstrating the damage, but I think it's a good spot to have it. Actually, looking at that left toe with the bright highlight, the chips look really cool where they're running through it. So definitely worth adding the damage, I think. I was a bit nervous about doing it, but doing it really small looks awesome, and it just changes the feel of the model. Even though I've got bright highlights, yeah, it looks damaged and stuff like that. So I've got some still shots here, nice and zoomed in, and you can see it doesn't look amazing and blended because we're so close up, but I thought this would be quite helpful, maybe to give you a more realistic expectation of what stuff looks like. So, but yeah, this is a nice way of looking at the size of the chips. I hope you can see they're really small. They're smaller than the rivets and stuff like that. And there's quite a few of them, but because they're so tiny, it works. I quite like how it looks on the thigh, actually. I quite like those chips there. And then looking at the collar, I maybe should have worn out that kind of main highlight at the front and had more battle damage, but I really like that highlight. I don't know what you'll call that section of armor, but where the tube goes in, it was just a really nice bit to highlight, so I didn't want to damage it too much because I liked it. But you can see we have some random chips over the collar and stuff like that. Maybe I should have worn away the edge a bit more, but I wanted the attention to be drawn to this area. And then we look at the shadow side where it's a lot darker and the chips still show up. A nice little shot of the damage across the toe there, and yeah, again, I think the chips look really good across going into the shadows and the highlights and stuff like that. Actually, I really like the look of this side. If you wanted them to be, you know, a bit darker, a bit more evil looking, maybe you would just take it this bright all over. Obviously, my style, I use quite a lot of contrast and my highlights tend to be quite bright. But yeah, maybe if you prefer this style, this is what you'll have the model look like all over. But I definitely like the colour, and looking at this shot, it's kind of similar to my influence looking at the Forge World thing. Obviously the tone's different, but the desaturated shadows definitely follow what I was looking for there. So I'm pleased with that after years of trying out Sons of Horus in different colours. So coming back out and looking at the finished green, I'm really happy with how this looks, and it's nice to have all the painted black parts around it to really look at just the green. You can see I really only did the bright highlights on the collar, the knee and the thigh, and actually a little bit on the toe too. But actually the calf part is slightly darker just where the angle changes. So it's important to, you know, really only brighten up those parts that are facing the light directly, or what I imagine. And then it doesn't look too over the top. If you have these bright highlights all over, I think it would look a little bit silly, but having these draws focus, gives it interest, and I think it's nice to have different intensities of light on different parts of the model. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I was surprised how much I enjoyed painting this model. I'm also really happy with how simple the recipe is. You know, essentially we've just got black Sons of Horus green and green sky. So I think it's easy to follow in that way, and then you can focus on just painting it well, painting it with a nice finish, getting the highlights the right shape and smooth. And yeah, I think it's nice not to have to focus on a complex recipe, and I was just happy painting the highlights nicely and stuff like that. Am I 100% happy with this green? I mean, I don't know what green I want, so it's hard to imagine, but this is definitely my favourite iteration of Sons of Horus that I've done. But a lot of this is to do with tastes changing and things that I've learned, I guess, as well. So, but I'm really excited to finish this model now. I guess the green's the hardest part because, there's a lot of it on the model. We want it to obviously draw attention to the right areas. And yeah, it's probably the hardest thing to get right. I'm going to do the face next because that's probably the second hardest thing to do for me personally. Then I think the rest of the details won't be so bad. So let me know what you thought of the video. It could be quite a quick video, but I really wanted to explain a lot of stuff and why. So I'm just looking at the counter now. We've clocked over half an hour on how to paint Sons of Horus green, which is quite indulgent, but this is what I want in the Patreon videos. I want to explain kind of everything I'm thinking about. So let me know in the comments what you think of the colour. Does it look cool? Do you like the Malagurst model? And if you enjoyed me explaining all this stuff. So yeah, we'll see you soon for painting the face. The sculpt looks really good, really crisp cast, really cool sculpt. So looking forward to that. And speak to you all soon.